Hello friends, enemies and the indifferent. This is Rob Miller, also known as the Baron von Aphid, attempting the first of what I hope will be a long and fruitful series of interviews, podcasts, questions, inquiries and general messing about with the fabric of our reality. This shall be for our education, our edification, our amusement, and also our bemusement, I suppose. Many of you will be familiar with my particular story over the last few years, and today is pretty much the 4th anniversary year of the time when I was kind of silenced and shut down. People tend to call it cancelled these days. What it effectively does is stops your voice from being heard generally over the normal platforms, as those platforms themselves reveal themselves to be entirely controlled, despite this sort of ambiguous benevolence, I suppose. It's taken me quite a long time to get my thoughts together around this and really to be able to approach it in a way that I can elaborate a little bit more on the journey itself. But what I have found extremely useful and important was the interaction that I started to get sometime around about, I suppose, 6 months to a year after things closed down here. I started to receive little messages and emails and then longer emails and whole sort of dissertations from people all over the globe. And I suppose what a lot of these folks had in common was we'd grown up in the same sort of scene, with some of the same kind of general attitudes. And the last few years had seen a kind of awakening amongst a lot of people and a removal of the blinkers from people's eyes. We started to be able to see the mechanics of how things work down here as they become more and more overt and easily identifiable. What struck me really was the variety of life experiences from the different people that were getting in touch, and also the familiarity of their stories and the shared kind of experiences that we had in the way that I suppose we tackled these issues head on. So many people came from the same sort of musical background, and so many of them seem to have grown up within the very urban environment and bought into a whole load of stuff back then, which has led them in a later time to head on out into the wilderness. So we have these shamanic individuals, really, who've started to do their own journeys. I have a friend in the desert in the US, friends in the mountains. I have a friend in the Channel Islands, a fellow I talk to often in Australia. All very much individuals who bought into this idea that what we were after was an expression of our individuality, only to find out really that soon got turned on its head as our scene, I do hate that word, our scene became invaded by a parasitical entity which has seemingly gained complete control. There is what I surmise to be a kind of moral cowardice which most people have bought into, rather than actually invest in any self-education or any individual thought and action. It's far easier for people to harvest likes and to be liked than it is for them to step outside for a moment and start to question the whole fabric of that which is around them. I see people that I knew back in the 80s in Bristol kind of going through exactly the same cycle that they were back in then. It's as though there's a sort of extended childhood that people are desperately trying to hold on to in order not to have to stick their head above the parapet and risk this impersonal assassination that you do bring upon yourself. For my part, I can only say that I'm really, really glad and thankful to have done this journey in this way, because back in 2019, I went through this kind of depersoning and losing a lot of friends, and the various attacks and all that kind of stuff, which are inconsequential. But the good thing about that is I got all that bullshit out of the way back then, and I'd kind of cleaned house. So when it came round to the whole COVID nonsense, most of my work had already been done where that was concerned. I didn't have to go through the trauma that so many people did when they realised they're being set family member against family member, friend against friend. And this agenda was so clearly splitting people into pieces. And so it was relatively easy to be able to make this choice, which is, nah, not doing that, don't trust it. I can see the same hands behind that have got their influence in every single sphere at the moment, in the media, entertainment, in the banking industries, law, finance, the music industry, of course. And it was easy to be able to recognise that distinct footprint, really, and make a decision, which was, no, we're not doing this. I don't trust them. I've got good reason not to trust them. And personally speaking, of course, it was a good decision. There's nothing that I regret about that. I don't know anybody that died in this past time, anybody that died from not having the thing. And that in itself consolidates my position really too. What I do observe, and probably a lot of you do as well, is the general unwellness of people around. And all of these complaints that are popping up amongst people, with heart problems, respiratory problems, there's skin dermatological issues, all this kind of stuff, people generally being unwell. And I don't know. This whole thing is about discussing, trying to find out if there's new information that comes in that says, oh, you're full of it, and you don't know what you're talking about. Or whether there is actually something to this, that something's been done to us, whether it was consciously and deliberately, or whether it was a byproduct of a hasty response to something which is clearly a manufactured crisis. But whichever way it was, it benefited certain people financially in an extraordinary way. We saw the greatest single transfer of wealth in the history of our species. And people were invited to dig in as well into that. I remember going onto a bank website when I was trying to do my normal business banking, and there was a little notice that was there saying, did you know that this is the greatest opportunity at the moment to be able to get involved in the wealth transfer, and if you want to do that, just dig in here. I never saw that again after that point, but it did make me question that and wonder exactly what's so good about the wealth being stolen from the poor, the working class and the middle class, and taken straight up into the hands of the rich and the corporate, who are quite wealthy enough as it is, really. So what's the deal? We saw Bill Gates and these other freaky weirdos lining up to endorse what we have to call a jibby-jabby, I suppose, on here. And after they'd made their small or massive fortunes, turning around and going, oh well, just because it didn't work, it didn't provide any prevention from transmission or infection. Oh well, what a shame. Still made lots of money. That was great. What a good venture. Let's see what's going to come next. But what we do have in the wake of that is an entire global society trained like monkeys to perform tasks in order to be able to be seen to be good and virtuous, to be seen to be part of the right people. And that in itself, of course, reflects exactly the same phenomena that's been endemic through the application of social media over the last, 10, 15 years, where people are increasingly corralled into these smaller groups that look at one another and see if they're wearing the same badges and see if they're having the same general views and approve of one another, constant approval. So we see this harvesting of likes, and that has replaced really the individual quest and journey for truth. It's the easy way. It's the recliner for the monkey boy. And what a job. I mean, the last several years, what a brilliant job of being able to carefully dissect different groups and elements and give them these kind of like tribal status, separate them from one another, make them mutually co-suspicious, and therefore fragment and atomize our society. So we no longer have the ability to be able to communicate with one another because there is this massive self-sensorial screen in front of us when we try to do so. The ability to be able to debate, to reason and argue is completely absent now. I have noticed that as things have gone along, that people can't engage in ideas anymore. All they can do is tear something apart without feeling any sort of onus or responsibility to provide any other information or truth. So it's the easiest thing to do, really. And of course, what makes that even better is if you have an audience of people watching you do that. More approval, more likes, more little thumbs up. Well done, monkey boy. I really wanted to open up a conversation, and I've tried with a few people, and to be honest, well done, those people that did engage. A few of them get into it for a bit and then just disappear off. Other people start straight off by being belligerent, and it ends up in threats. And that's not what I was there for. I've always believed that none of us knows everything. We know so very little, and we never will know everything about anything at all, really. We're just doing our best to navigate through this world at the moment and try and find truth with a small t. Truth with a capital T. I'm not sure whether that's accessible to us as human beings, particularly in this kind of diminished state, I suppose. But to come back to these individuals that have been in touch, it was really heartening and really enthusing to hear from people that have clearly been doing their own journeys. And whilst we don't always come to the same conclusions, which is really healthy, we come to a sort of roundabout, broad focus on what's important and what's not important. And I see a lot of people reconnecting with the natural world, not in that sort of trippy-dippy hippie sense that pervaded the 60s and 70s, but as a realistic response to what can only be conceived as an entirely anti-human stance and agenda from those in the corporate and unelected bureaucracies that we see scattered around the world at the moment, and who are increasingly seeking to have more and more control over our individual lives and livelihoods. So a lot of us are looking in the other direction, the wheel that turns to the left rather than the right, which is a reconnection with the things which are being stripped from us. Although really, nature is always here. The natural world is always here. It's always there when you want to sit and listen and observe and be struck by how that all copes, that all deals with itself. The whole of it is symbiotic and works together as a whole to be itself. And what's missing and what's odd and dissonant in that equation is often our human presence there. Let me know how you feel about that. I had a friend who was so excited, even 10 years ago, to discuss this idea about the Internet of Things, interconnectivity, how soon we may be able to upload consciousness into the cloud and all this kind of stuff. How the whole experience of being a human being is being diminished and synthesized down into digital data. And how everything essential and numinous is being stolen by people whose only real aim seems to be the desire to be served, the desire to have control and power over everything and everybody, and presumably eventually to try and immortalize themselves. And it's all the same hubris. It's all the same stuff that we hear about these mythical antediluvian civilizations that have come before us, 4 or 5 different cycles perhaps. And when it comes to the zenith of its technological abilities, it descends into degeneracy as the rise of the eunuchs in ancient Rome and their sway over court intrigue led to the eventual destruction of that once great empire. Degeneracy being the inability to generate, the inability to create anything new, novel, creatively brilliant, artistic, again, numinous, meaningful. And so here we are, in the same pattern again, round and round and round the wheel, in what some people regard as the Kali Yuga, a descent. Not seeming to have learned anything really from the lessons. Just self-aggrandizement, personal enrichment, and a preoccupation with power and control. Meanwhile, the natural world carries on, as it always has, indifferent. Perhaps waiting for us to come to that point of stillness and quiet when we can actually listen. And on that note, after almost 20 minutes of waffling at you, Thank you for your listening. And I hope to catch up with you in the near future and talk to other people. Find out how they tick. Find out what it is that we're doing here, what we can do here perhaps, and how we can work together, even when we're scattered to the four corners of the world. Because it's clearly about consciousness and what we do with it. Till next time, the Baron signing off.
Harvesting, the day is done. On plough and furrow fall the last rays of the sun, westward like a wave. Leaves are shed like golden rain. The earth is bled, and so our winter comes again. All is silent now. And sorrow draws the plough. The heaven are alive now. With shooting stars. Winter's rain shall end, and then the bird song will return. The tender roots of spring, nature turns again. And sorrow draws the plough. Man shall follow with the green again. And sorrow draws the plough. Harvesting, the day is done. On field and furrow fall the last rays of the sun, westward like a wave.